gonna talk about Japan today. Today's history, guys, because yeah.
Oh my god.
But
So
today we have like a special guest, right?
that's gonna be on Thursday.
Ah, okay. Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, okay, so I think that's that's the time. So right now I want to ask you guys because we'll probably have a guest speaker session on Thursday. So for the debate, would you guys want to postpone it or cancel it?
Cancel
By
it.
show of- okay, by show of hand, who wants to can cancel it?
We're canceling it.
1, 2, 3,
yeah.
4, 5. Okay, I'll give a hand as well. 1, 2, 3.
Why did Albert raise his hand? Do you want to cancel it?
Yeah.
All right, so we have
The
7
topic doesn't make sense.
3, so we have the majority voting to cancel the debate. So this week's debate is canceled. You guys can take a day free.
Okay, so I think it's better if we get started. I don't know where Lucy is for the recordings, but I'll just text her now. But let's just get started with it now. So Kevin, pull out the video now.
Sure. Yeah, the video is like 49 minutes, but we'll just watch 10 minutes of it.
Damn, bro.
Many years before the attack on Pearl Harbor, officers...
Yeah, someone have a quick question?
Yes, me.
Oh, that's Lucy. Okay.
Okay. Just like before we start watching the video, can Albert just kind of make a introduction? So basically saying, okay, today is the session so it'll be easier when I was doing the editing, So I have the materials. Thank you.
No problem.
Albert, you want to say it or I say it?
I can say it, sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the third week of the Young Politicians Convention. But today, there's a twist. We're
No, wait. Because Kevin is presenting and when you're speaking, your image will not jump out.
Sure.
Wait, I'm to pinch you. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. You can go.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the third week of the Young Politicians Convention. But this week, there's a twist. Because we're not only talking about politics, but we're talking about history. To be precise, Japanese history, and how modern politics compare to historical politics, and how they have evolved over centuries. Now let's get going with the session.
of the Japanese Navy drew up their first operations plan to destroy the American fleet in the Pacific. It was based on the latest technology and the best military advice available. When it was finished, the plan became a cornerstone of Japanese defense policy. The date was August the 15th, 1907.
greatest double cross in history. Jap envoys talk peace in Washington. Jap planes, without warning, bring war to America. Our great Pacific outpost in the Hawaiian Islands is ruthlessly bombed as Japan's perfidious declaration of war. Death and destruction unleashed on a nation at peace. Our battle cry is, remember Pearl Harbor.
That is how Pearl Harbor is remembered to this day. In an unprovoked attack without prior declaration of war, Japanese naval bombers killed 2,403 unsuspecting Americans and knocked out the United States Pacific Fleet. To Americans, it was an act of simple treachery. But history is usually written by the winners, and some contemporary Japanese historians see their country as a victim.
When you look at it from the Japanese point of view and take into account the Japanese state papers and documents, as well as the testimonies of survivors, I don't see that Japan really wanted to start the war against America. I think the war broke out because there was a strong desire on the American side to force Japan into war. That desire came from the top.
In Japanese eyes, America and the British Empire were major obstacles to Japan's territorial ambitions. Most of these were directed at the mainland of Asia, at China, where Japan had been at war since 1931. The roots of Japan's conflict with her neighbors go back to the 19th century, but Japan's road to war was also her struggle to come to terms with the ways of the West. Until the 1850s, the Japanese had lived in deliberate isolation. Their history and their culture were their own. Their emperors came from the oldest ruling house in the world. It was the intrusion of foreign traders and the fear of colonization by the West that compelled them to modernize. Japan adopted a parliament, a penal code, and even a peerage, as in Britain. She also acquired an ambition to become, like her mentors in the West, an imperial power.
It was Britain that Japan took as her guide. In 1902, they entered into the Anglo-Japanese Treaty. Japan was quite convinced that she would not make any mistakes as long as she followed the British example in diplomacy. All the Western powers had followed Britain in developing their international relationships to suit their own convenience. They all went about securing their own colonies and ruled over them. Japan came on the scene rather late in the day, but she followed the rules in a most exemplary fashion.
Early in the century, Japan already held a substantial presence on the mainland of Asia. Korea was a protectorate. Further north, Japan held extensive rights in South Manchuria and neighboring provinces. In all, Japan's empire stretched from Taiwan in the south to Sakhalin in the north. With an eye to further expansion, her naval and military leaders identified the powers they thought most likely to block her supremacy in Asia.
The first imperial defense policy was drawn up in 1907. There, a hypothetical enemy was actually decided upon. The army would be at war with Russia and the navy with America. Thereafter, all drills and military exercises were carried out with this in mind. Since these two countries were depicted as Japan's potential enemy over a long period, the idea gradually arose among the young officers that it was Japan's fate to go to war with both of these countries. I think it was inevitable.
In 1904, Japan issued her first direct challenge to a Western power. In a territorial dispute over Port Arthur on the coast of mainland China, the Japanese army fought Imperial Russia for several months. It was one of the first wars to be recorded in moving pictures. On land, it was the Japanese who won. To save the day, Russia dispatched its Baltic fleet to the Far East. The fleet took 7 months to sail halfway round the globe, only to be wrecked in less than a day by Japanese warships. The world was impressed, Not for centuries had there been such a rapid rise to international power. There was special praise for Britain, whose alliance with Japan had been signed 2 years before. For the British had built the ships and trained the officers that defeated the Russians. Later, in the First World War, Japan fought on the side of the Allies, and in the victory celebrations in London, Japanese soldiers and sailors marched alongside their British and American comrades. When Japan's future emperor, Crown Prince Hirohito, paid a state visit to Britain, Anglo-Japanese ties became closer still. His visit to the fleet at Portsmouth, together with the Prince of Wales, was one of the highlights of his tour. In contrast, relations...
For 15 minutes exactly, for all the motives behind Japanese expansion and the cost to war. And right now, I think we can start to share ideas and opinions. Sure.
I'm just gonna try and start us off, but I think in these situations, it's always really interesting to see how like nationalism plays like such a strong role and like propaganda in general. Like in the video, it said that like Japan was blaming Western influence for all of its faults and like a lot of the issues. They said that it was because Japan is so attached to Western ideals, which could be partially true, but again, it's most likely over-exaggerated. Like there's truth in it, but they would try and blame kind of other countries for their faults, and in that way they were able to kind of get unity in their people.
All right, good idea. Helena?
I would say that we would have to mainly like separate the motives, because it does change like the process during like time. Because at first I would say the first motive was the need of adaptation, because they realized, hey, if we don't adapt, the Western people are going to come and colonize us, and we're just going to be another like pawn in their game. So they tried to level it up by assimilating like the different like contracts that UK gave them and try to like adapt. But then after, when the conflict started to arise and they also wanted to colonize part of China, I would say that we could kind of see that the motives were like what we were saying like before, which was like the motives were like nationalism. And also in the papers like that assigned readings, they had this ideal like Asian standard, saying that they were like going to rise and they're going to be like the power in Asia. So there was a very big like idealistic part, sort of the end of like the conflicts. So I would have to like separate those.
All right, good ideas. And then just to add up, Japan since 18th century have never been colonized by any Western power, which is different to other Asian countries such as China or Korea or Myanmar. They are all colonized of either France, Germany, or Great Britain. And after that, talking about the Guangdong Army, because they've said the Guangdong Army occupied Manchuria. There's a clear cut between the Guangdong Army and the Japanese government, because the Guangdong Army was a autonomy there. It wasn't really restricted by the Japanese Empire, and they can do whatever they want at that place. Just to add those 2 points up. Yeah, and Mark?
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to say more about what Vika like briefly mentioned, which is nationalism and militarism in Japan and how that could have influenced it. I mean, they specifically propaganda, they put into the education in 1890, because we talk a lot in IB history about Japan. In 1890, they introduced the idea that the emperor is a god and that Japan is right about everything into their education. So that's obviously big on propaganda, and that would have influenced a lot the next generations. And then what you said about the army, yeah, they were very separate from the state, but the state never condemned any of the actions that they committed, even like the fake train bombing where they blame China. To this day, they're not admitting it. So, yeah, there's probably a lot of the factors related to Japan was nationalism, militarism, and another thing is like what Kevin said, which is that they were never colonized by a European power, and they even beat a European power in war, which was the war against Russia, which would have made them feel like they're very unique in Asia, and they're like really strong, they're the best. They would have had like a very big ego as a nation, and that would have raised their nationalism. Yeah, thank you.
Like just to add up to Mark's point, yeah, they believe Japan was the savior of Asia because first, it was never colonized. Second, it had defeated a major Western power in the Russo-Japanese War. And third, Japan has consecutively won.
Yeah, Kevin.
Connection error. So basically, I was saying Japan had a special meaning because they've won consecutive wars, they have never been colonized, and had defeated major Western power. And it was the first Asian country to wear westernize and has proper management in its army. So all this granted its speciality of Japan. And the next is Victoria.
Yeah, I just have a question. I was gonna ask if anyone knows, like, why did England sign the like agreement with Japan? Like, what was the benefit for them from doing that?
Well, first, England wasn't on the risks to start a war or to start a conflict in the Far East. So it's best they sign a non-aggression pact so they won't both intervene.
Can I add on to the answer?
What?
Can I add on to the answer?
Sure.
Yeah. Again, because we talked about it in history, England signed an alliance with Japan like way back in 1902. So they didn't really have anything to do with Japan going into like World War II. It was more that they would support Japan if they were invaded by, or no, if they were invaded by, let's say Russia, because Japan was kind of scared of that at the time. And it was good for Japan to have a Western ally, and for England, it was good economically because they could trade with Japan, which was a very big country in Asia at the time.
Yeah, and the next item for you waiting so long.
No, it's okay. So apart from everything that has been said, and which I agree, I just want to share a thought that, like, after seeing the video, and especially that part where, like, about the racism of like how, like, you know, how the pool was divided into, it really kind of shocked me, like, because I know that there was a lot of racism back then, but I didn't know it was to this extent. And so this just shows us that when one person, like normally the one who encounters itself with like such like racism and injustice treatment, this is why you have to first of all empower yourself and become more powerful than the other person in order to be able to stop such injustice happening to you, which is just something that shows us that, for example, like during that time, since Europe was more powerful than Asia and like other parts, and obviously they had more control in how to manage things, and so racism was mainly happening. And now, besides from this, there was also the part where it talked about the Europe, America seeing Japan's like entering China as a threat, shows us that, like, and saying that, oh, it's just to protect China or to defend China. That's so fake. Like, come on, it's only superficially saying that, yes, I'm just trying to protect China, but it's actually because for their own interest and their own desire to satisfy their own like country needs for the resources and everything else, they're just like, oh, I'm just trying to protect China, which is so freaking stupid. But all right, yeah, that's it.
Yes, Hannah.
Can I just comment on the last part? Because, like, I get that it's like kind of superficial that countries try to help other countries for like economic or like whatever advantages, but that's kind of how the world like kind of works. Like everything is at the end going to be superficial because the government is going to look for like their people and the wellness of their country. And if they just decided to like give up on like their citizens and look for the best like in other countries, then it wouldn't really make sense. So I get where you're coming from, but it's kind of, I feel like it's a really good point since it happens like anywhere, like all countries that make agreements, both of them have to win something in order to firm that. They're not going to win it just because one of them is taking like all the profit and the other is just like, oh, we'll just like gift it to you. That's not going to happen. So yeah.
Okay, Mark.
Yeah, I was kind of gonna say what Elena said, but I also want to add the fact that, oh, there, that apart from, you know, it being superficial and everything, I mean, nobody actually did want Japan to go to war with China though, because nobody really wanted a second world war after the First World War. So it's partially superficial, because after all, like, the League of Nations said it was bad and everything, but then they didn't do shit. They just said like it was bad. They didn't do anything. So, but at the same time, most people, except for like Germany, Italy, didn't actually want a second world war. So, I mean, I wouldn't say it's entirely superficial. I mean, like, it's not entirely superficial. Like, they, yeah, that's it.
You don't believe Germany wanted a second world war to happen?
What? I didn't get the question.
You said you don't believe that Germany wanted the second world war.
I said apart from Germany and Italy, they did.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I misheard.
Well, so I mean, if you talk about World War II, I think that's a communicative process of Germany and Italy and other nation not taking any action towards the expansion of fascism. Well, that's another part, but right now focus on Japan. Yes, Helena?
Yeah, like based on what like you and Mark were talking about, that like the nations didn't do like anything. I read a bit about that, and I think that Japan was kind of using like a tactic. They were like putting forward like reforms and like being really active diplomatically to cover what they were actually doing. So they were trying to like say like, oh yeah, we can make these agreements, but they never passed those agreements. So they were kind of like stopping the process of them being like stopped from like taking land or whatever. Like they were stopping it by like diplomatic like procedures and stuff. So like based on what I read, they were kind of like hiding and like pushing that like intervention back so they have enough time to like intervene.
All right, so there's no one wants to speak right now, so I want to bring up another perspective, talking about why would you think Japan can be westernized so fast in such short of a time? Japan can be competitive to other Western nation with warship and with well-structured army and with all the equipment. Sure, Elena?
I saw that they used to do a tactic, like they used to, since they were like before World War II, as we commented, they were allies with like UK. What they used to do is copy, like invite like people from like Western countries into their country so they could copy how they do things. And then once they copied how they did things, they made it their own. So they would like really invest in like entrepreneurs and kind of have a competitive market. Like in essence, they would like the government would pride those who like get really high, like more capitalistic values. So that mixed with the fear of wanting to modernize, so they don't be, so they're not like looked over and they can become like a power, like that joints like help them to quickly modernize, in my opinion.
Thank you, Elena. Mark?
Yeah. I want to say, I mean, she's right about everything she said, but apart from that, also another couple of ways that helped them modernize so quickly. Well, they learned from the West in the Iwakura mission, which I think was 1871, which was basically a bunch of Japanese diplomats went to America mainly and studied their ways, so to say, in order to like modernize faster and adopt all of their ideas. And then they had the Meiji Restoration. Actually, that was before. but they had the Meiji Restoration, which made their government a bit more democratic. Well, I think they commented on this in the video shortly, saying that they adopted like kind of similar to England with the parliament and the prime ministers at the same time as the emperor, but the emperor was still kind of seen as the god, so it's a bit confusing. But the essence is that adopting like Western capitalism and kind of Western democracy, plus all of what Helena said, would have helped them to modernize faster. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Mark. Just to add up, before the Meiji Restoration, the Japanese structure was divided. There was the empire, there was the shogun, there was the submarines, and the farmers, and the merchant. Basically, the power distribution is very unequal. The shogun, because they control the army, they have the actual power to rule over the country. And the empire was just ruling by its name. It didn't have any influence. Well, it has something kind of influence, but it's not definitely they have power to decide. And after that, in the Meiji Restoration, the Meiji Empire gained, how to say, a concentrated power from all the sectors of the nation. And that's why they were so united. And also the Meiji also proposed that he was a god. Furthermore, make people believe that he can guide Japan to a better future in Asia or in the world. Next, Victoria.
Yeah, what I was gonna say is linked to that. My point was that it was relatively politically stable compared to a lot of other countries, because especially after World War One, I feel like a lot of like Western countries were still kind of in like that shock period after what happened. But because like geographically Japan was so far away from the main battles, they kind of weren't affected by it as much, and so it allowed for them to kind of focus on developing their military and like industrializing, while like the West wasn't doing that as much. So they were able to catch up over that period.
Yeah, it was definitely a very potent far for Japan, because he was allied, or she was allied with other nations. And during that time, because the battlefield was taking place in Europe, Japan took the opportunity to sell its oil and other materials to other wartime nations.
I think we can maybe like raise the question: to what extent was their expansion like justified? Was it justified? Was it not? Why? I think that would be something interesting, because we'd have more diverging opinions on that specifically, perhaps.
Sure, Albert. Let's say, like, to what extent was the protection true? Or is that what you're proposing, Albert?
To what extent was the Japanese expansion justified? Like, to what extent was their conquering of many like countries and new territories justified? Floor is open.
And who was first, Albert? Can you see a foreign list?
I think Elena's first.
Elena, yeah.
All right.
Mine is just a question, like, are we going to count the last part that we saw? Because I remember, like, Albert commented that the Kwantung Army or something, they're, like, separate from Japan. So that, instead of, are we gonna count it as, like, a Japanese, like, intervention, or, like, taking of territory, or not, or, like, expansion?
I guess you can count everything, like all of their attempts.
They're like separate.
I think like I can't really speak exactly for this scenario, but I know like with other countries, when they have these like separate groups, it's still very much the country. It's just they're trying to kind of distance themselves from any, like as a country, they're trying to say, oh, we're not fighting that war because it's like an autonomous military, but they are still kind of under that country. It's just trying to not kind of cause conflict or make it look as bad as it is. So that's what I think, but
thanks.
All right, Mark.
Yeah, basically with the army, they said it was autonomous, but it was more, rather than the emperor controlling the army, it was more like the army controlling the emperor. There's also two parts to the army, so it's pretty confusing. But in general, because Japan was so like militaristic, you can't say it was separate from the state, just because the army I think there was a clause in the Constitution where they always had to have at least one member of one of the important ministries be from the army, and almost always leading up to World War II, it was the prime minister, which obviously the most important guy. So there's no way to say that the army was separate, in my opinion. It was not really an opinion, but yeah.
Oh, well, Victoria.
Okay, well then just starting to answer the question, I think I'm leaning towards saying that like their expansion was justified, because I think what we often see is that like the stronger nations are gonna do what they gotta do kind of for themselves. So if Japan was able to kind of make the best out of the situation and use its resources correctly and expand and kind of, because it was expanding to try and create economic stability and give people resources. So it was doing what it needed to do for its citizens, and that's kind of often what happens with countries in the world. So I think it was justified, and it's kind of, I don't want to say normal, but it's an expected thing for them to do.
I can.
All right, so I'm just not gonna be focusing the question, but I'm gonna be talking about like we're going back to the question that like Bud made to me about like the thing that I said about America's very typical in the sector. Like I didn't find evidence because it's more of like the way you think about it, like according to like all of the things that happened and events. And so like about America is that, for example, like there tend to be very superficial in the on the surface, especially for example of the of the Taiwan. The thing is that they act like they're supporting they act like they're supporting that country, and then obviously when you support something there's a reciprocity rule, and so obviously you get something in return. And obviously America supporting Taiwan as well as like for example Ukraine. The thing is that why it is a threat to Russia or it is to a threat to like China is because they're neighbor, like it is right the neighboring land of of that country itself. And so obviously America, what he's trying to do, like this like kind of like strategy or something, is that to get closer to its enemy or like competitor in order to get more resources from there. Or like how now China and America, they have like tension between like spies and all of like online like attacks. That's the thing. So like if America were to able to put all of his military like settlements in China or in Ukraine, for example, then it obviously would be a threat to the other country like Russia and China, since you don't know if you have someone right beside you that is your enemy, wouldn't that be not safe? Like wouldn't that be like a threat to you? So that's kind of the thing that this is why I'm stating that America is like very typical in this, because not only these two examples, but there's many other things. Because if you see it, how come like America's always involved in some kind of like war that is happening, but they do not seem to be the one who's actually participating in it, but it is the one who's like supporting all of the supplying with all of the war tools and resources to whatever group or party it is. And so that's kind of a thing that I thought of. All right, so if you want to like extend it or like change anything, yeah, sure.
Wait, Aitan, can I ask?
Aitan? Oh no, Aitian.
Aitan, sorry.
Because of the email.
How can you relate that to Japan? I'm just kind of confused.
No, I think that was because in the comments you said America is very typical in this sector.
Oh, okay. So I'm understanding you right. She was just explaining that. Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Into modern days, like, is it justifiable for a strong nation to took an action on a weaker nation for claiming for protection? But I mean, the people that definitely got protected and got economic benefits, but what was the sacrifice of that?
Yeah, wait, I didn't get to answer to Aitan. I know we're diverging a little from the topic of the discussion. However, I feel like it's really interesting because although America is involved in many like different political crises and militaries around the world and conflicts, it is not only America, and evidently America has interest in Ukraine, and evidently America has interest in Taiwan because they're closer to their enemies. But doesn't every single country in the world, back when the Soviet Union was a thing, they had interests with Cuba, and they like they had things going on there. Every single country has interests, and they're gonna do the best for their people, as we already mentioned before. So I don't believe we can't simply portray America as this kind of like devil or this horrible country that's trying to like get closer to its enemies to like you know, make them suffer, like win over them, because it was the problem. Those countries caused problems with their neighboring countries. Taiwan does not want to like, you know, be independent from China just because they want to be independent. It was because they have a history, and well, they had a really long history, and Taiwan has its reasons for wanting to become a westernized nation. Same with Ukraine. Ukraine has history with Russia, and Russia has invaded Ukraine, and Ukraine has valid reasons, equally valid reasons, to want to be independent and be a westernized nation. So it wasn't just America's decision to like make these countries completely westernized that is causing these problems to unfold. That is like my response. And also to like answer the question that was asked earlier about whether Japanese expansion was justified, I believe that the aggressive imperialism is never justified in general. So I would lean on, you know, towards saying that Japanese, well, their expansion was not justified either. However, it is really important to consider the fact that their national supremacy was kind of like affected by westernized nations that were like actively trying to suppress their dominance in Asia. So, yeah, my opinion on that topic is ambiguous.
Elena, please.
So since we drifted from the America topic, and I think Albert mentioned most of the things I wanted to mention, and also like America's a very big military power. So eventually they are going to be dragged because of connections, since all the world is like essentially a very big network. So all countries are going to be like dragged into directly or indirectly if we want it or not. And to answer the like current question, I think, yeah, I also lean with Albert that I get like Vika's point of like, okay, it's like for survival, but I think there's always alternative ways of going on about it. If what they're seeking is economic stability, they could have like engaged in more trade. They could have like worked on like contracts or trying to like improve in some way or pass laws that like reduces taxes and opens more opportunities for business making. So I think there's always like more alternatives, and like aggression should be like the very least one and should not be on the top of the list. So yeah.
All right, thank you, Elena. Mark, please.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to agree, because considering all of the like atrocities and war crimes that Japan committed in China, I can't say that their expansion was in any way justified, especially considering the fact that, I mean, they had a pretty good economy going. They didn't like need the resources in Manchuria or in China. Well, Manchuria is China. They didn't need them. They wanted them to have a better economy. They already had a good economy. They had everything going for them, except for like maybe they didn't have too much respect of the Western nations because they were racist. But then you don't have to win that respect by killing Chinese people. That doesn't make any sense. I don't know. I don't see how you could justify the expansion saying that they did it for a good economy.
Thank you, Mark. Salsa.
Yeah. So I mean, you mentioned that like they didn't have any reason, like they already had a good enough economy and all that. But we got to look also at the fact that Japan up until like the early 20th century even was pretty much a cult-like state that had no contact with the Western world pretty much. So I'm not justifying what they did. What I would say is that they started having trade with the Western world finally, and they became greedy and started moving on, and people really weren't 100%, let's say, up to date, in quotation marks.
Thank you, Salsa. Mark, do you still want to respond?
No, I was going to comment on something, but
okay.
It got resolved.
Sure. Victoria, please.
Yeah, no, I completely see what you're saying, and I think in a perfect world, obviously, I think the same. The only problem is that when it comes to like what is right and what's wrong, like war crimes and all of that. I think, you know, you can't just isolate the war crimes that Japan did. You can just as equally say that the segregation in the US was also not fair and not justified. And then there's going to be a long, long, long list of things that aren't right and are not justifiable. But like, kind of the way that I see it is that there's always going to be bad things going on. And so it's hard to kind of, I'm trying to pick the right words, but it's hard to kind of only focus on like what we can do that is peaceful, what we can do that is good, because kind of in the real world, we've never seen examples of just peace. There's always going to be some sort of conflict and some sort of ethical or morality problem. So I don't think it's, you know, simple enough to say that, oh, they should have just talked about it, or they should have, you know, they should have solved it more peacefully, because I don't think that's a realistic way to do it.
Thank you, Victoria. Elena?
So yeah, I agree on that point. Like both sides, if we look at it, they have both done like wrong things. But right now what we're focusing on is like Japan's action. So I get your point of like, yeah, everybody has done like stuff which are like reproachable, but Japan, like exactly in what we're talking now, it's not like justified for the previous reasons we've mentioned. And also like there's a difference between like actual war and then what like falls into a war crime, because if you look at war itself, it's like a breakage of the basic human rights and loss of laws. That's why there's a whole separate legal system for like different like war procedures. For example, getting children or like killing families which are like innocent in some form, that falls into a war crime. And that's kind of what like, based on like some sources, like China has like proved that like, hey, Japan actually did these like grotesque things that fall into these war crimes, and it's not, you cannot like justify that because they wanted like more economic power, because what economic power can it bring you to kill, for example, a Chinese farmer? Like, so there is like a kind of a difference between those, and that's why the actions put all together, I would say, would not be justified.
Thank you, Elena. Mark?
Wait, first, before I speak, the question that Albert just put in the chat, so, wait, isn't that a bit different from the question that we had in the chat before? Wasn't it, to what extent was the expansion justifiable, something economy, something 1931, 1941? No, I'm wrong. Okay, fair enough.
That was like originally the debate question, but
okay.
The debate was cancelled.
Right.
Just
Okay.
whatever you have in mind. Just
I'm outdated. Sure, I'll still say what I was saying. What I was gonna say is I agree with what Vika said, that we can't always solve things peacefully, but I mean they didn't have much to solve. Like I said before, like what did they have to solve? They had a great economy. Their citizens were fine. All that they didn't have was maybe not enough respect from the Western nations, but it's not like they were completely disregarded by the Western nations. They saw them as a threat, and that's respect in itself. I mean, I don't know what they would have had to resolve by expanding into China, or not resolve, prove. There's just nothing. There's nothing to resolve peacefully or non-peacefully. I don't really understand what you meant by that. Clarify.
Albert, who's on the list next?
Wait, let Victoria go first, please. I'm just gonna search something to evidence.
yeah, Victoria's next either way. So
Okay, so I think what you're saying about Japan having a great economy beforehand, again, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm saying this just more as like a fact, but I'm pretty sure they were going through an economic crisis because they were directly affected by the Great Depression happening in the US, and so they weren't trading as much as they were usually. And plus, in combination with the overpopulation that was happening, they did need more resources. It's not like they were in a perfect situation where, you know, they just wanted to expand. There were like issues that they were trying to resolve through the expansion. Again, I don't want to say that what they did is okay and it's good. I think the question is it justifiable? So is there like a reason behind it? And I think that personally I do see the reason behind it. That doesn't mean that I think war crimes and killing a Chinese farmer is okay, but the reason that they killed the Chinese farmer was to get land, and the getting land is justifiable. Not the fact that they killed the Chinese farmer. It's not, if you take it out of context like that, of course, it sounds bad, but there's like a reasonable reason behind it. I feel like I'm kind of circling around myself now, but I understand what you're saying. I just think I'm kind of trying to look at it more from like a greater picture. So, yeah.
Thank you, Victoria. But we need to bear in mind the Great Depression happened on 1929, and the Japanese expansion happened 20 years before. So, it wasn't because they were desperate on economics, so they want to expand on China. I personally believe, statistically showing that the Japanese population was growing very rapidly, so they must find a place in the future to prevent this thing happen. And plus, Japan was not a natural resource rich country, so they need to find another rich resource country to support its all the citizens. And the expansion started in 1902, and in 1919, the Japan have demanded a 21 demand that basically trying to take over all the ports and all the connections routes in China. Sorry, and
Oh wait! I was going next. Oh wait,
okay.
Like I
Oh,
by
yeah,
accident,
sorry.
I clicked my hand by accident. Yeah, so sorry. All right, so okay, so ladies and gentlemen, please let me remind you that 30 million civilians were murdered by the Japanese during this Japanese expansion. So like, are you still gonna tell me that this number is a joke? So you're gonna tell me that this can be justified because they wanted to, for whatever reason, they wanted to justify with it, oh, because of gaining more resources or land. Do you think that this number is more important than because of whatever reason they had? If that is how, then please tell me, because I do totally disagree if you're telling me that it is justified in any way, because this number is not a joke. Millions of people died, and what happens if it was your family generation people? Like, would you not hold a grudge against it? Would you still like, oh, forgive them because for whatever reason they justify with it? And so remember this. Now thinking about if you're going to justify it, think about this number. And also this is a complete show, a clear evidence that this is how Japanese were like. They were like playing the scene of the strong ones over the weak, because they knew that Europe were more powerful than Japanese in a way, and then China was like more in a position where they were more vulnerable. And so obviously this is just a scene of the strong over the weak, which is unbelievable, outrageous.
I think it's fair to say that we're gonna give this round to the final thoughts. So everyone gives a final thought, and we start concluding. But y'all can still express your opinions or answer as your final thought. So Mark.
I think Elena was supposed to go before me, or do you want me to just go?
Oh, I don't know. It's just the list. On my list, it appears as you first, later Elena, and later Victoria.
Okay, sure. No, I was just gonna say that the Great Depression. Well, I mean, Kevin kind of said it, but also then Japan kind of got out of the effects of the Great Depression. I'd say by about 1932. By that point, they were pretty much fine, and they didn't really need to expand for their land. I mean, they had land to build on. They just wanted to occupy houses that already existed in Manchuria. So I still don't really think it's justified. But I also understand that you're not justifying the war crimes and everything. I just don't think the expansion in general was justified. That's it. I pass my final thoughts on to Viva. Come on, Viva. Don't be shy.
Oh, I think the next.
I'm not supposed to go next. Elena's supposed to go next, actually. So maybe pay attention more.
Okay, let's preserve the respectful tone in this discussion. Elena, you're next.
Okay. So, yeah, actually, I'm gonna add on onto Mark's idea because I'm in the same line of argumentation. And like the fact that they decided to get into another like sort of like war and trying to occupy even more land just shows how like economically stable they were, because the last thing you want to do when you're economically unstable is to try to gain like more land, because that takes lots of expenses. We can look at that like in the case of Spain when it was in during World War II. They wanted to take part of the Second World War, but they couldn't because they were in actual like very bad economical state because of the civil war that was going on. So that shows when a country really is in need of economic like supply, they can't even like do like the most like basic interactions or like hand weapons because they don't even have enough for themselves. So yeah.
Thank you, Elena, for your point. Albert, should we Victoria?
I think I don't have like anything. Like I can conclude, but I don't feel like we have the time to continue having arguments.
Just conclude in that case, like your final opinion.
So my final opinion is that Viva should offer her opinion.
Okay, everyone who votes in order to have Viva speak, raise their hands. Okay, the overwhelming majority wants you to speak, Viva, so please conclude.
This is a form of harassment.
It's not.
Okay.
This is actually a form of support, Viva.
Oh. Okay, I'm kind of like, obviously I've been listening to what everyone's been saying, and I personally cannot like decide between the two sides, just because obviously I agree with Victoria that the expansion, in a way, it is justified. Like, I don't remember if Kevin said this was like true or like false or not because of like the Great Depression or whatever, but they like didn't have contact with the Western world. Someone said that really quickly. I just wanted to say that like if that is in fact true, then I understand how that's justified, but I don't think the killing of, I don't think that's justified. So I'm really like drawn, like I can't decide is my point. And that's why I didn't say anything actually, because I can't decide for myself.
I think in that case, you probably agree with Victoria because she evidently does not support the war crimes, but she does think like the reasons for the expansion are kind of justified. So yeah.
I think making decisions for me is not like a very respectful. It's very political, actually. It's very.
You're unable to make decisions for yourself, clearly.
Yeah, he's giving you the right decision.
Well, give me some time and I'll figure it out.
You had an hour.
Yeah, we're ending the meeting.
Everyone else made up their mind.
Okay, then sure, I'm on Victoria's.
Cool. Anyhow, Kevin, would you like to conclude?
Can I take a cast picture?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, is this okay with everyone? Can I take a picture? Okay. Okay.
All right, guys, I think that's the end of the meeting. Thank you for your all participation. And for next week, first we'll just stick back with ongoing conflict about, yeah, you agree, Albert?
Yes, Kevin, I definitely do agree.
Can we talk more about America? Like, I just want to, like, you know.
We will. We're actually going to have, yeah, I'm actually also really interested in that topic. We're actually going to have a few guest speakers from America in the coming weeks as well. Also, just to point it out, this Thursday, we're going to have a guest speaker from Kenya who's going to be talking about Kenyan politics. So that's probably going to be interesting. So yeah, just so you know, at 7 o'clock Thursday, join. And you can also, like, talk to him and, like, yeah, hopefully spike some conversations. So, having said that, thank you for joining, everyone. Hope this was really enlightening, and see you on Thursday.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.